Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Josephine. I'm a research associate at the Center for AI and Data Governance here at SMU. Today I'm chatting with Mark and Willow about their recent working paper called Trust and Regulation and Analysis of Emotion. So hi Mark and hi Willow. Maybe to start this off, Willow, maybe can you briefly go into kind of what was the spark for this paper, who proposed writing it, what were some initial key ideas and themes that you wanted to delve into?
Sure. Yeah, initially, Mark and I were interested in exploring what helps create harmonious AI and human relations. But I was initially tasked with looking at ethical relativity in terms of what kinds of values resonate with different cultural communities across the world, and how does that correlate with the sort of AI ethical frameworks that we're seeing today, and what sort of ethical framework we want to see in the future. But that, I think, has changed as we sort of worked on the paper, hasn't it?
So how did that kind of get developed, this idea about ethical relativity kind of become this really in-depth paper about trust and then emotions and the role of effective communities?
Yeah, so well, Mark and I had a lot of discussions, and one of the things we realized was it's not going to be very helpful if we started comparing different systems of thinking and which, have different sort of diverse intellectual heritage, and trying to collapse that into sort of like a one true moral theory that fits into an AI ethical framework. That's not really satisfying, nor is it, it's quite problematic to do that. And we also came to the understanding that actually, when we're understanding what makes AI ethics work, principles alone, especially in its very abstract form, that's not really the only thing that motivates human behavior. So we started looking into trust as something that has a more universal appeal to different communities around the world, and everything that leads up to trust. And that's, I think, where emotions entered the picture.
Yeah, Mark, maybe you can comment a little bit about what the inspiration for this paper and whether that trajectory that Willow just talked about was also the same on your end.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. I think building on what Willow just said, we moved away from that rather simplistic approach that different communities, different societies have different approaches to ethics, and started to think a little bit more about what's common to communities. And we picked up Roger Cotterell's idea that communities are not a thing or a place or a time. They're connected through bonds of trust. And so we were wondering whether, in fact, whatever the community might be, if you introduce AI into that community so that it becomes part of the relationship framework, how do humans trust it? And how does that trust generate strong and sustainable working relationships? And I suppose the connection with emotions was largely saying, well, if we have some ethical principles and we want to make ethical decisions about where we put AI in communities so that it generates trust, what emotions support those decisions and what emotions seem to work against them? So the paper's not a deep paper about, emotional mysticism or emotional psychology. It's just a suggestion that different forms of emotions impact in different ways on how we respond to ethics and how we translate ethics into decisions about what we do and who we trust.
Right. I think just from this kind of quick introduction, there are already lots of themes here, like AI ethics, AI principles, and then the role of trust, and the role of communities, and the role of emotions as well. And so to me, when I read the paper, like kind of three pillars of it was like ethics, trust, and emotions. But maybe we could go into kind of, what the arguments and the key ideas presented in the paper so that everyone who's watching this can be kind of on the same page, right? So what's the thesis that you're presenting, and what the kind of like steps that work up to that thesis? Willow?
Well, if I can try and, summarize and break it down as much as I'm able to, I think that in the paper, we argue that in order to build shared trust between AI and human, we're saying that AI ethics should be located in the community. It should be formulated by the community in service of the community. And so what we're proposing is that the entire decision-making process about how AI should be designed and used and regulated is geared towards the success of shared trust in the community, whether that's in a local sense or a global sense. And so sitting under that umbrella, we start from the understanding of community as characterized by social bonding. You know, like Mark said, we drew from Roger Cotterrell's paper, which sees that what defines a community is the bond between people and people, people towards objects and places. And so that idea is quite dynamic, it's fluid, it's always changing. And when we're thinking about how can we design and deploy AI tools to minimize disruptions and uphold the social bonding, we are saying that a focus on that angle will help people grow to trust AI and make AI integrated, better integrated into the community, rather than people seeing these sort of foreign tools as like potential threats because they have no idea where it came about, they weren't involved in the process. And so that approach is actually very different from a one-size-fits-all type of assumption. We're saying that instead of coming up with a list of abstract ethical principles, we are proposing that decision makers should consider the local context, what makes people feel trust, and what upholds those unique relationships that characterizes a community space. And so in that way, AI ethics is more of a way of measuring how effectively can AI stimulate public trust and help achieve social good, rather than here is a list of principles, let's try and tick all of them.
And I think also what we were trying to do was to recognize the different communities approach trust in different ways. So some communities, you know, are really quite cynical and critical. Some communities are very open and you know, willing to embrace new ideas. And we wanted to be able to reach across those different contexts. The other thing I think we were trying to do in the paper was to avoid the idea that trust is an outcome, you know, that trust is a result of, you know, putting a smiley face on a robot or whatever it might be, but rather what we were hoping for was through the process of translating genuine ethical principles through emotions to decisions and then the location of AI within communities, that trust becomes a vibrant part of the regulatory scene. So trust actually becomes something that makes us feel comfortable with the machine, makes us not feel comfortable with the machine, but at the very least makes us feel integrated, like that we have a place in why that machine is with us and what it does.
Yeah, I think before we kind of delve into this idea of like the role of trust in the community, maybe we could step back a little bit and talk about your critique in the paper, I guess, in the initial part of the paper, talking about current conventional ways of talking about AI ethics and AI principles. And you kind of propose like a very interesting alternative of communitarian AI ethics. Maybe you could expand on that a little bit more, talk about why you think it's necessary and what this is to begin with as well.
Sure, I think Mark and I pretty much agreed on one very simple belief, which is that AI tools, wherever it's created, it should benefit the community that it is located in. And so from that point, we thought, well, AI ethics should be formulated by the people and all the key stakeholders that characterizes a particular community, as opposed to at this point in time, there is a in mainstream sort of approaches towards creating an ethical framework, it seems like we're importing a lot from foreign geographies and from great powerhouses that may not apply directly to these local scenes and local contexts. And so it's about, I think, a commitment of valuing local knowledge and local relationships and giving that sense of autonomy to create a vision for how AI and humans can coexist. And there are so many different ways of interpreting that. So there's sort of no real need to conform to one standardized approach. And in fact, diversity of thought is a really valuable thing.
And we do that not with, succumbing to relativity by saying, well, there is no thing that we have as a common principle. There is no idea which sits across all communities. What we do is we say that there are some themes that seem to be quite resilient, but there are also some very different approaches to what is more important, less important, and how we define certain things. So, for example, we would want AI to engage fairly with human beings, and fairness is a common aspiration. But what it means could be very different from community to community. So we wanted to recognize that possibility. At the same time, and this perhaps is a criticism of our approach, we didn't want to deny the importance of universal values. We don't want to be in a situation where communities that are patriarchal or are discriminatory or are inherently unfair can propagate that through their attitude to AI. But I think what we're doing more generally was to say, with those principles that are important, like justice, fairness, empathy, these have locations and they have ways of being interpreted that need to be respected and recognized.
Yeah, I think to kind of link this to the role of trust in the community, maybe we talk a little bit about what you wrote in the paper about how AI functions, and you write that AI can be designed to perform functions and exhibit behaviors that preserve social bonds and contribute to a kind of a community's resilience and overall well-being. And this was quite interesting to me because I think when you're studying kind of the effects of AI in society, you tend to see more of the social harms of it, even though kind of there are good things about AI and that should be celebrated, right? But then also the benefits of AI tend to be quite individualized as well. Like there's like personalized healthcare and personalized education. And I think the way that you've constructed AI's role in the community is quite different from these benefits. So maybe you could expand on that a little bit more, right? So what do you mean when you say that, AI could perform functions that preserve like the well-being of a social community?
Well, I think the angle that we were trying to come from in the paper is that AI participate in social bonding in the sense of when they are functionally reliable and safe to use, they serve a function in our everyday life. And so, for example, when we see digital maps and they always get us from point A to point B, that quality of trustworthiness and reliability allows smart technologies to become a very essential part of how we navigate around the world that we're in. And that's a very intuitive process. So through these technologies, we're able to form new bonds in the world, and we also get to maintain the ones that we currently have. And so in a way, our idea is very simple, which is that AI technologies can become a channel through which we participate in the world. And so in that process, we become bonded to the purpose that these tools serve in our everyday lives. So the smarter the technology, the more seamless that bonding process might feel. And with regards to the element of helping a community endure or persist through time, the idea is that if we can align the capabilities of these technologies to meet the sort of emerging challenges that we see in our societies, including something massive as climate change, then it seems obvious that the outcomes of our communities in a local and global sense persisting and continuing to exist in the future is going to be improved. I feel like although this approach is quite different, as you say, it's actually a rather modest proposal because it's different. It doesn't do what other proposals we've seen, for example, from developers who argue that, well, if we can inject emotions into the machines that we use, then they can automatically understand our needs. They form a bond with us, and in this process, completely neutralize the potential social harms that we might anticipate from these tools within the community that it's being deployed in. That proposal is radical, and that's not what we're trying to argue. In fact, we resist against that. Our idea is actually a lot simpler, which is that when we integrate what the community needs into the design and deployment of AI, then it is going to help people within the community accept its role and purpose.
And I think that an example might help here. In Singapore, the government is very keen to locate sensors within public housing estates, one of the justifications being the desire to keep vulnerable people safe, the elderly safe in particular. And one of the policies behind that is that the elderly should be able to live at home independently for as long as possible. So we should try and have AI-assisted tech that makes that a reality. But what about those communities that don't want that? They may not want grandma to live on her own, live independently, live in a situation where she is, if you like, created in a sort of modern universe, but they might want to return to a much more conventional notion of the extended family. And so the sensor then becomes an intrusion. It doesn't become a support. Now, whichever of those policies is right is not really for us in this paper to determine. What we would say is that if that sort of tech was to be introduced, it should reflect what the people in those urban environments would want. And then it will be responded to positively. And this is sometimes a nuanced question. We might be happy to have grandma looked after in some parts of the house, but other parts we don't want her privacy to be intruded upon. And so those questions become challenges, I think, for policymakers to actually sit down, listen, engage, and be willing to take criticisms that might, in fact, qualify the introduction of AI in certain situations.
Yeah, I think I was struck by what you wrote about how the key to all of this is to introduce more representative and participatory pathways, right, into kind of the regulation of AI. But to tie it all together, kind of like ethics, trust, and emotions, maybe you could speculate on a little bit about what these pathways might look like, Mark.
Yeah, that's a real challenge for us, I think, because if you were going to be cynical, you might say, well, lots of people don't care. They don't want to get engaged. They don't want to talk. They don't want to get involved. I think that's partly because AI has been, up until recently, quite a disempowering element within our society. So governments tell us they're going to have a super app that we will have to go to if we want a government service. Banks don't talk to us anymore. We have to go through a chatbot. There are whole lots of examples of where no one's ever been asked about whether those technical developments are important. And I think what ties our approach together is that given the right opportunities, which might be based on information, understanding, discussion, and simplified introduction of the technology, then people will start saying, hey, this does have a relevance for us, and yes, our voice matters. And I think that the idea of engagement is one thing, but the idea of empowerment is much more important. And so our aspiration for AI and communities is only going to have legs if people start to realize that firstly, they do have a role and that the empathy between them and the machine produces something that is of value to them. So, the pathway is an interactive process, Other research, I think, will have to emerge that proves or challenges that. But I think, again, it goes back to communities themselves to work out how they feel that that discussion can best evolve.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Well, I think I've learned quite a lot from, your thought processes. It's really helped me think a little bit more about how to understand the paper itself. And I think you both have kind of joked about how the paper can be quite dense at certain points. So what's one thing that you hope general audiences will take from your argument?
I think for me, just to reiterate a point that Mark made earlier about shared trust, not as like an end product that you can guarantee through intensive sort of control measures. In the paper, what we wrote is that trust is relational. It is shared between 2 points of contact, whether it's between people and people or people and an object. And so one of the main takeaways for me personally in writing this paper is that in order to foster shared trust between people and AI, a lot of it actually also comes down to how much trust do we have towards each other, towards the people who created these tools in service of the community. And so at the heart of it, trust is about people, it's about relationship. And because it is so organic and dynamic, we can't take it for granted that it will emerge as this neatly packaged product, always waiting at the end of a tick boxing exercise. And in fact, it sort of relies more on the sense of duty in people within a community to maintain the status of trust and harmony.
Yeah, and I think that if I was to reflect on a central driver for me in the paper, it's to say that you can't blame the machine. That in many ways, this is a discussion about people making technology, people supporting technology, people promoting technology, and people receiving technology. And up until quite recently, I think we're constantly being told, that we have to become technologically aware. The digital transformation is not a matter of choice, but it's the future. While at the same time, really not going to that earlier question, which is, okay, well, if that's true, what's in it for me? What's in it for my friends? What's in it for the people that I live with? And that's not, getting back to a point you made a little bit earlier, Joe, that's not simply about the conventional notion of ethics, which is my right, my individual liberty, my this, my that, but much more a discussion about we're facing problems, we're facing challenges, which may not be as well serviced if we don't have the benefit of technology. So how can we share with it to outcome some result that is a genuine attempt to deal with those challenges? So I think it's let's not be over reliant on the tech itself until we step back a little and say, all right, who are the people involved in this ecosystem that's promoting tech, and where does it stand for us? So it's a responsibility thing, I guess.
That's great. Okay, my last question is, what was the most interesting part about writing this paper, and what are some areas of research that you can see yourself kind of exploring more because of having written this paper?
Well, I think Mark will agree with me that this paper has really gone on an evolution multiple times during the writing process. I think what I personally found very challenging was researching and writing about emotions and its purpose in decision making without getting sidetracked by all of the other literature. And I think what would be really interesting is to research more into how do these sentiments with regards to public distrust or trust, how can we effectively navigate around that when we are trying to implement AI for social good? There are chances of people's hesitance getting in the way of innovation, but there are also situations where people's reluctance to embrace technology is actually very justified. And so how do we navigate around these emotionally motivated convictions? I think that will be a very tricky research topic, but I am interested in it.
Yeah, I think for me, the challenge of working with a philosopher in itself was an interesting experience. I think that in many ways, the interactive result of what we've produced has moved from sort of vague things that we would like to see happen through an exploration of lots of different theoretical devices to something which really is quite practical. And I suppose if we were looking at where does this take research now in the field, the first thing I would say is that it does emphasize the importance of theory. We've had the luxury in this paper to be able to speculate left, right, and center because we didn't have to do the empirical research. So we've laid out a potential to go out there now and test. I'd be really excited by the opportunity, if I had it, then to go out to real communities with real AI insertion and find out whether our discussions about trust and empowerment, the creation of trust bonding, is really what it's about. I remember discussing just this with Roger Cotterrell once, and he said he was lucky because he'd never actually had to do any of that. I think that that's actually in some respects unlucky because we would like to be out there and giving it a shot. If it's not us, then certainly it's out there for someone who likes the ideas we're putting forward to, let's say, give them a run and see if they hold up. If they don't, then that's in itself an interesting outcome.
Yeah, I think I would personally definitely want to see some kind of empirical work being done on these themes, because I think it's quite fascinating, and also to be able to ask people if that's actually the case is kind of, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't necessarily mean that the theory itself also doesn't work, right? It's just needs to be reformulated. Great. Okay, so thank you, Mark and Willow, for sharing these very engaging sets of ideas. And I really look forward to seeing how you develop the paper and these ideas even further. So for our audience, if you're interested in reading the paper, it should be linked with this video. Otherwise, you'll be able to easily find it on our website at cidg.smu.edu.sg. Feel free to send us comments or questions as well, and follow our social media pages for more updates about our research. So thank you for watching this video and have a lovely day ahead.
Thanks, Joe.